All right, another fantasy season is in the books, and I am ready to look back at some of the defining storylines from this year, topics that will undoubtedly be the subject of thousands of debates across the industry this offseason. I've had a week off to decompress a little bit, recover from some week 17 tragedies, and I'm excited to jump into this one. So, my name is Paul. This is Pure Potential. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a comment, like the video. Let's get into it. Okay, I'd like to start with what I think will ultimately be the most memorable aspect of this fantasy season, which is that all the running backs were awesome and all the wide receivers sucked. Now, I'm sure there are a lot of nuanced reasons for this year's running back renaissance, which I will leave to smarter minds, but honestly, I think health is a big part of it. I've got a couple tweets here from Ron Stewart highlighting just how different this year was when it came to running back versus wide receiver scoring. So in the first one, we've got a chart. It says running back versus wide receiver scoring in the 17-game season era in terms of 285 plus PPR point seasons. So over the last 4 years, you can see how the running back versus wide receiver performances shake out when it comes to these really, really high-end players. I'm not sure how he landed on 285, but it still works for our purposes here. And 2021 to 2023, the wide receivers had a clear edge where there were more wide receivers each season than running backs hitting that number. In 2024, it's flipped. 6 running backs up at 285, only 3 wide receivers. So when you're thinking about those serious impact players, right, league defining players, it was mostly running backs this year, and that has not been the norm. Now, Ron's second tweet actually lists those players, so you can see who was in the 285 club. Jamar Chase actually ended up being the highest scoring running back or wide receiver this year by quite a good margin. But then we have Jahmyr Gibbs, Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Derrick Henry, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devon Achane, and Josh Jacobs. So 4 of the top 5 players ended up being running backs, and 6 of those top 9 with 285 plus PPR points. And this health discrepancy only becomes more clear when we check out the top 12 scorers at each position. So starting with your top 12 running backs, they were shockingly healthy across the board this year. You look at this list, Barkley rested in week 18. He didn't actually miss any games. Kamara is the only running back in the top 6 who missed any games this season. And even Mixon and Taylor, who did miss a few, were healthy for the fantasy playoffs. But looking at this list, I mean, it's really only Kenneth Walker down there at RB12 who really killed you with injuries, especially missing games towards the end of the season. But otherwise, this list is shockingly healthy, and this was not the case at wide receiver. When we look at the top 12 wide receivers, you've got Chris Godwin, who finishes the year as the wide receiver 2 in points per game. His season was cut short with just 7 games played. Puka missed 5 games. He left another one early with injury. Higgins was in and out. Nico had an IR stint. Adams, Evans, AJ Brown, they all missed 3 or more games. I mean, this top 12 is just riddled with injuries, especially compared to the running back position. And then further down the board, you get to Rashee Rice. He was trending towards a top 6 season through his first 3 games. You have Stephon Diggs and Devonta Smith. They missed a decent chunk of the year. They're in that high-end wide receiver 2 mix. And you even have Tyreek and Waddle, who didn't really miss many games between the two of them, but they were stranded in no man's land when Tua was out. So across the board, the wide receiver position was just decimated in a way that I really don't think that we've seen, at least not in recent years that I can remember. And I don't suspect that's a trend that's going to continue. I think that that's kind of random injury variance. And so my overall takeaway from this discrepancy between the running backs and the wide receivers, plenty of time to get more into the details of it through the offseason. But my overall takeaway is just, this is a really unusual year of injuries. And that's not to say we should totally just throw out this year's results. I don't think that at all. The market was clearly too low on running backs across the board in Dynasty and in seasonal leagues, underdog especially. I was part of the problem, but I mean, running backs getting pushed down like crazy. But this is going to even out next year. A lot of this is going to even out, I think, just through the natural variance of injuries. And my initial expectation is that the market is actually going to overreact to this. They're going to overcorrect running back values. Now, I'm open to being wrong about that, but that is my expectation. And you have to remember, in Dynasty especially, the position is still highly fragile. Alvin Kamara, he was being traded for first-round picks when he was a week in and week out RB1. He gets a little dinged up later in the season. He misses games. nobody is sending you a first round pick for Kamara. I mean, you'd be lucky to get an early second at this point. Christian McCaffrey's value cratered this season. Even guys like Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, who are very young and have been very productive in their careers, really saw their value in Dynasty tail off towards the end of the season when the results just weren't there. So it's still very much a what have you done for me lately position, more so than any other. And so I still want to be careful about over investing in running backs, and I want to be picky about which running backs I'm investing in. Now, before we move on to the quarterback position, I just want to ask you one more time, if you enjoy my Dynasty content, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I'm pushing towards that 5,000 mark. I'd love to get there in the month of January, and I've got a lot of good content planned for the early offseason here. I'm going to be doing a series of videos on rebuilding, transitioning your team from rebuilding to contending. I want to do a big overview of the free agent class, and obviously we have those 2025 rookies coming up. We're going to have things like the NFL Combine. We're going to have mock drafts, so a lot of rookie content as well. You're not going to want to miss any of it, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I do not think that you will regret it. Now, on the quarterback position, I don't have a ton of super concrete takeaways right now. It does feel like that QB6 to QB20 range in Dynasty just became kind of a jumbled mess because you have guys like Stroud and Love and Kyler and Dak and Lawrence that just didn't live up to the preseason expectations. Then you have guys like Baker and Goff and Nix who massively overperformed. They smashed expectations. And my general take here is really just that passing stats, especially touchdowns, are really volatile year to year. And so I'm trying my best to not overreact to what we've seen this season. I have definitely moved those underperformers down a little bit. I have moved Baker and Goff up in the rankings. I have moved Bo Nix up in the rankings, but it's important to not overcorrect or overreact, because if anything, that is the default mindset of the fantasy community. It's just to kind of chase their tail year in and year out, chase what happened last year in perpetuity. I would like to swim against that tide. And I especially want to highlight the passing production from Baker Mayfield and Jared Goff. These passing touchdown numbers are simply unsustainable. If we look at passing touchdown percentage over the past 5 seasons, so the percentage of a quarterback's passes that become touchdowns, there's an average about 5 quarterbacks a year that get above that 6% mark. That's a really high touchdown percentage. Baker's 2024 season is actually the 3rd highest in that whole group. So the 3rd highest since 2020 in touchdown rate. And Jared Goff's 2024 season is also in the top 10. Now, the big thing here is that neither of these guys have another season that's even close to this year in terms of touchdown percentage. And if you look at Jared Goff, his next 2 high seasons in passing touchdown percentage were actually on the Rams with Sean McVay. So for both of these guys, I think clearly touchdown regression is coming. And you also add in the risk that both of these players could lose their offensive coordinators to head coaching vacancies. Liam Cohen in Tampa Bay, Ben Johnson in Detroit. Both of them should be hot candidates in the head coaching search. Both of them could be on new teams. That doesn't mean Baker and Goff are going to fall off a cliff. It doesn't mean that they're not going to be good fantasy quarterbacks next year. But personally, and you can attribute this to stubbornness if you want, I'd be much more inclined to sell high on these guys heading into the offseason than buying into them at this inflated cost. Okay, let's move on to the tight end position, which deceived us once again in 2024. I thought there was reason to believe that tight end was actually, finally, for once, a deep position with at least half a dozen high ceiling options. But then you have Dalton Kincaid, who flopped. Kyle Pitts flopped. Mark Andrews was horrible to start the year, and even by the end, he was mostly just carried by touchdowns, nowhere near the previous peak of Mark Andrews. You have Sam Laporta, who fell way short of his expectations, and Travis Kelce, who has basically 2 feet in the grave at this point. Looking back at the season, the tight end position wasn't flat and deep like many expected. It was extremely top heavy once again. Kittle had an amazing season, finishing as the tight end 1 in points per game at 15.8, but at 31 years old, his dynasty value is capped. So for our purposes, 2 tight ends stand well above the rest. Brock Bowers and Trey McBride, they actually had almost identical seasons. They were both just over 15 points per game. They both had over 110 receptions, over 1,100 yards. they were super, super similar on a production basis. I've got Bowers comfortably ahead of McBride in Dynasty since he did all of this as a rookie. He has the better college pedigree, and in my opinion, he has more room for his offensive environment to improve, and also more reason to think that it's going to improve, where you obviously are going to get a new coach, you're going to get a new quarterback. That stuff's not as clear in Arizona, where their team is pretty locked in to Kyler Murray. They have Marvin Harrison going into year 2. So both incredible players. I'm still giving the edge clearly to Brock Bowers, but I think both guys actually became significantly more valuable dynasty assets this season, not only because of their own play, and they should have risen a lot just based on how productive they were, but also because the rest of the field underperformed so dramatically. So my big takeaway here is that the positional advantage at tight end is still alive and well. And right now and moving forward, it is Bowers and McBride, and then it's everybody else. All right, the last thing I'd like to talk about today is this historically good 2024 rookie class, which is absolutely the best class we've had since at least 2020, when we got Burrow and Herbert and Jonathan Taylor and a bunch of really good wide receivers. This year has been outrageous for rookies. We have Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, Drake May. Those guys are already top 15-ish dynasty assets, with Jaden Daniels having a legit case to be the actual 101 in startup drafts this offseason. Then you have Lad McConkey, Bucky Irving, Bo Nix. Those guys have all massively exceeded expectations. Even a lot of the relative disappointments like Caleb Williams, Marvin Harrison, Rome Odunze, I think all three of those guys have reason for optimism heading into year 2. I don't think any of them are likely to be, just straight up busts. And then you've got solid depth in the class as well, with guys like Xavier Worthy coming on, Tyrone Tracy, Michael Penix, Jalen McMillan, Keon Coleman, Ricky Pearsall. I mean, the only major busts that were going fairly early in drafts are Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. That's really it. And one of those is just injury related. So the hit rates across the board have been incredible. If you are overweight on this 2024 class, your dynasty teams are sitting pretty at this point. It's important to understand, especially if you are newer to dynasty, that this is not the norm. You shouldn't expect every rookie class to come in and completely change the landscape like this. But at the same time, this is exactly why you should be taking shots on rookies, no matter where your team is at, whether you're a contender, a rebuilder, somewhere in between. You always want to be taking shots on rookies when you can, because they have this unique ability to gain value exponentially. They can completely turn your dynasty team around, or they can supercharge a team that's already good. Rarely do we see these types of jumps from non-rookies where they ascend so high so quickly. And I want to look at 2 examples from this year. Look at JSN and Bryce Young. These are 2 players I was clearly wrong about. I was out on both guys this offseason, or at least at cost, and they have rebounded and gained lots of value this year. But if those guys were rookies, like if they did what they did this year, but they were rookies, they would be going multiple rounds higher in startup drafts, right? JSN would be valued closer to where Malik Neighbors is right now if he did this as a rookie. Bryce Young would probably be valued ahead of Bo Nix, would be pushing into that Jordan Love, CJ Stroud, Kyler Murray range in dynasty startups. And that's because as rookies, we only have the good sample. And so that production makes up 100% of our opinion of the player. Whereas these 2 guys, they still have a little bit of that negative energy around them from their bad rookie years, which isn't to say that they're not players you should want to invest in or that you don't want to grab them. It's just, I'm pointing out that the market dynamics are different for rookies. They just have a fast pass to the front of the line, basically. And so you always want to be drafting rookies when you can. I try to be overweight on the rookie class, at least on the rookie profiles that I believe in. And so even though 2025 doesn't look quite as impressive as 2024, I guarantee you there are still going to be plenty of impactful players, and probably more than we think. And some of them are going to come from spots that we just don't expect at all. So keep an open mind as we move into that prospecting season, and don't panic, ship off all your 2025 picks. I don't think that that is the right response. Anyway, that's going to do it for today, guys. As always, thanks so much for watching the video. Thank you for supporting the channel. If you enjoy my content, go ahead and subscribe. Really goes a long way. I'm super excited to shift into off-season mode here, and I'll be back soon with another Dynasty video. Hopefully, I'll see you then.